Thank you. We are honored to have Onur Bakiner with us tonight. Onur is a professor of political science and the director of technology ethics initiative at Seattle University. Onur, thank you very much for coming here.
It's an honor, it's a pleasure.
So I'll let you introduce yourself before we jump into the topic.
Of course, yeah. Before we start, I want to echo Bahram in acknowledging the difficult situation. I really hope that all of your friends, loved ones are well, safe in these difficult moments. And again, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm a political scientist by training, and my past research was on more conventional human rights, especially in Latin America. But for the past decade or so, I've been working on technology and some of its risks, potential risks and harms. And so that has led me to work more on the topic of artificial intelligence, its ethics, and its governance. And meanwhile, the institution that I come from, Seattle University, has been also making efforts to incorporate technology more centrally into its curriculum, into its research, and so on and so forth. So I was appointed as the director of the technology ethics initiative. So we have year-long events. I'll be very happy to talk about it perhaps at the Q&A. In fact, we have an annual conference, and this year's theme is energy and security. So it's an increasingly more interesting and important topic, how energy, cybersecurity, physical security intersect with technological innovation in these days. And so that's going to be on May 15th. Yeah, so recently I published a book called Governing AI, Primer. So it's been out for about a month and a half, I think. And so I think a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is coming from the book.
Perfect. So I'm going to ask a few questions to start this debate, and then we will open it for more questions from the public. The first question is about the control of safeguards around AI. And particularly, there was an incident a few months ago between a company, notably Anthropics, and the Department of Defense. They basically had an argument who should control, who should put the safeguards. And there are different jurisdictions, and European Union, China, United States, United Kingdom, the rest of the world, they have their different ways of dealing with this issue. That is it about a private company role to control those safeguards, or is it the government? If it is government, who controls the controller? What is your take on that?
Yeah, thank you. So, first of all, maybe we should think about artificial intelligence as a new technology and what that means. Is it all that new? Is it not that new? In some ways, it's not new, in the sense that technologies have posed risks since time immemorial, and those risks are in fact regulated, especially in modern times. So cars have seat belts. There are speed limits on the roads. Drinking and driving is not allowed, right? So there are certain rules about how cars can be developed, deployed, and used. I don't know, cigarettes have all sorts of labels about their harms. Food, any food you buy from the supermarket has a nutritional label. And so, in some ways, safeguards are always there in any kind of technology, tool, product that you can imagine. So artificial intelligence in that sense is not all that new. I think what is new is that, one, the chain of responsibility is not easy to establish. So when an artificial intelligence system comes up with a decision, and if there's no human in the loop, it's really hard to establish who ultimately is responsible. Is it the user? Is it the developer? Is it somebody else in the value chain? So if a person uses a chatbot to come up with something that is illegal or harmful, Is it that person's criminal responsibility? Is it the company's criminal or civil liability? Is it the platform where it's hosted on? Is it somebody else? And so, there are some challenges like that. And then I think the other thing about most artificial intelligence systems is that they are general purpose. So they typically serve multiple purposes. Like for example, pattern recognition. It can be helpful in the sense that it can, distinguish between the photo of a dog and photo of a cat. Or it can be useful in radiology, right, in diagnostics. It can also be useful in, say, military applications to find military targets. And so perhaps one, like the very first one is fairly innocent, straightforward. If there are some mistakes, it's not a big deal. The second one, radiology, it is a big deal to have false negatives, especially. And then with the military applications, it's absolutely crucial to have some kind of safeguard in place. But again, it's really the same underlying technology, and I think that really complicates why artificial intelligence is not always regulated properly. Now, I'll talk about some jurisdictions, and very briefly. So, the United States, which has been the home to most artificial intelligence inventions until about recently, doesn't have a federal AI regulation. Some states have their own sort of regulations around things like deepfakes or automated decision making and so on and so forth, but there is no federal law. And I kind of feel like that's by design. Before the Trump administration during Biden, there was an executive order that recognized an AI Bill of Rights. And so that was mostly for federal government agencies to work with because it wasn't a law. It was not really binding on the citizens. And then when Trump came to office, he revoked that executive order, and now he has pushed very hard not only not to legislate federally, but also ban states from legislating on AI. This was part of his, if you remember last year, the Big Beautiful Bill. So part of that was actually a ban on AI legislation, and that was the one thing that senators pushed back against in a very rare sort of case of consensus. 99 of the 100 senators basically pushed back against that, and now Trump is trying to push that agenda through an executive order. So that's the US. The one law that is perhaps worth mentioning is the European Union's Artificial Intelligence Act, the AI Act of 2024. That is the one law that has really set the global trend. It establishes high risk, medium risk, and low risk AI systems, and it basically obliges companies that produce high risk systems to assess for impact, assess for human rights impact, conformity, and so on, and legal conformity, and so on and so forth. A couple other countries like Peru, Vietnam, South Korea have similar laws, but again, around the world there aren't many laws. I think around the world the idea is let's first develop AI and then let's see if there are any risks and harms, which I personally find problematic. I don't think innovation and regulation are necessarily opposites. It's possible to have good innovation within a framework of regulation. So anyways, that's maybe a long answer to your question.
No, that's perfect. I just have a follow-up question. In some areas of innovation, including telecommunication, because of the nature of telecommunication that goes beyond countries, there are international laws. Atomic laws also come into that category. Do you think there needs to be, or is there already some international body governing AI?
There isn't one, unfortunately, and as we know from other areas of life, especially war making, that right now is a time when international cooperation is really suffering. The United Nations system is in some ways paralyzed, and even some of the regional entities like NATO are not working, let alone a truly international order. And so AI is one of them. I think initially American technology companies believed that they were the leaders, and so they didn't really want to be tied up, or they didn't want to be regulated by any international norms. Of course, the past 5 years or so, we see the emergence of China as a major AI player, and so now they're not terribly interested in international treaties either. And so we're in a situation where there's very little, maybe no, political will for an international law, but there are social movements, there are civil society movements. For example, there's a movement to ban killer robots, so essentially military AI, so AI systems that can choose and select and fire on targets. So there's a social movement that asks for a ban on these kinds of weapons, but again, they're fighting an uphill battle. There isn't really an international law. At the level of Europe, the Convention of Europe has a framework on AI, so that is the closest thing that we have to an international order. And the Convention of Europe is it's not just the European Union; it's all 47 countries in the broader European region, including countries like Turkey, former Soviet states, etc. And so that one is a little bit broader, but that's about it really. Beyond that, we don't have an international movement.
Now that you brought the EU, I have one more follow-up question. So EU has famously tighter, firmer hands-on AI regulations compared to US at least. Do you think it's an advantage or a disadvantage for European companies to innovate in that area?
Yeah, so European lawmakers actually started started regulating AI with the understanding that they would be as successful in regulating AI as in regulating data privacy and protection. And maybe those of you who are in the technology sector would know that the European Union has the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, and so it sets firm limits on what can be done in terms of data collection, storage, and analysis. Especially collection and storage. And so European Union citizens have a lot of protections from online platforms or technology companies. And that was a huge success. Other parts of the world saw that as a major success. Other countries imitated the approach. California has a consumer protection law that is pretty much a copy of the GDPR. And so European lawmakers thought that we should do the same with AI. It's going to be the Brussels effect. Europeans are going to take the first step and everybody else is going to follow. Now, though, European lawmakers, of course, this is a huge group, like 700 lawmakers, at least some of them seem to be regretting that and they want to move back to loose regulations on AI with the argument that Europe is not advancing in AI. I am not sure that regulation is the reason why AI is not advancing in Europe. This is a continent that has been at the forefront of a lot of innovation. After World War II, they lost the leadership to the United States. With the amount of investment going into AI in the US and China, the European Union is somewhat behind, but I don't really see a law that was passed in 2024 being the reason for why Europe is left behind, actually. But that's just my personal take.
Thank you. The next question is about transparency in complex systems and notably the data. So the question is, as autonomous AI agents handle more complex tasks, the new data driving their decisions is increasingly hidden from users. How do we enforce transparency in data programs in these black box workflows?
So I know that I'm surrounded by computer scientists, and so I'll try to, computer science professors too, so I'll try to explain the best I can, and please feel free to correct me, but today's artificial intelligence systems are, by and large, an extension of machine learning systems, which are advanced statistics / social network theory / linear algebra, so let's say advanced math. And of course, the approach that dominated in the past 15 years is deep learning. And so this is important because fundamentally the numbers that go into a deep learning system don't make intuitive sense. So for those of us who have done various basic statistics like OLS, etc., typically that's more intuitive, right? So you see that, oh well, if X increases by one amount, Y increases by 0.7, so they have a linear relationship or whatever. Whereas in a deep learning system, the intermediate steps, the numbers, the weights, don't really make any either to the producers of these systems or anybody who would read them. Now, so in that way, having perfect transparency in an AI system is really impossible. Even reading those weights wouldn't necessarily say much about what kinds of risks and harms go into those systems. With that said, there is definitely more transparency when it comes to variable selection, so feature selection, for example. Why choose that data set or those features within a data set rather than the others? Or data provenance, for example, that's another one. Where do the data sets come from? Say something like ChatGPT, where does all that textual data come from? And so with things like that, you're right that companies, so this is not a technical impossibility, they definitely can actually release the information on where their data come from. Typically, the reason why they don't release, again, it's not a technicality, it's really about business secrets, so they tend to treat data as proprietary and belonging to that company. And so I think politicians, lawmakers may have more of a role to play in forcing them to release data on data provenance features and so on and so forth. And in and of itself, that doesn't really release a lot of company secrets either. I think one can find a fine balance there between transparency and company profitability.
Thank you. Next question is about the high stakes in accountability. When deploying predictive models in critical environments like healthcare networks, how must policy adapt to balance operational efficiency with the absolute need for human accountability?
Now, that's also a very good question, and again, I think it really depends on every sector. So, like, if your business is just about sorting out cat and dog photos, then false negatives or false positives are not a big deal. Like, every once in a while, one can mislabel the dog for a cat, and that's okay. But if it's medical diagnostics, the false negative rate should be 0% pretty much, or as close to 0% as possible, right? And so I think every business really should select what it is that they need to keep people safe. And I know that this can also be a very political question, so like it's not just a technical question. To give an example, so for somebody who believes that safety is the most important thing in the world, and even if somebody like just looks a little bit like they might commit a crime, we should just first arrest them and then see what happens. So somebody who's really a security freak, they would probably prefer a lot of false positives in how data about crime are processed. But now think from the perspective of somebody who could be actually arrested for the wrong reasons, right? From their perspective, a false positive is loss of freedom, maybe loss of life in some countries. And so what I'm saying is that these are not just technical problems, these are also very much political problems about our fundamental value systems, what we value as foundational human rights and human values in a society. And then, so that's one. And then the other thing is, I think there should always be a human in the chain of command. So regardless of where the responsibility falls, there should ultimately be a human who is responsible. I'm not a lawyer, but maybe one example is like if my dog bites you, even if I'm not guilty in the strict sense, I'm liable, right? So even if I didn't cause the dog to attack you, it's still I have to pay the price for the dog's behavior. And so one could think about an artificial intelligence system as similar, even if the deployer or the user of the system is not strictly guilty for how it acts, there should be ultimately a human who is responsible for the output, for the outcome.
Thank you very much. Next question is about intellectual property and the ownership and the creators. So generative AI relies heavily on training data created by humans, often cloning distinct styles and voices. How should policy evolve to protect the fundamental ownership rights and livelihood of authors, musicians, artists, novelists, Maybe.
Yeah, and so this is partly a legal question, partly an ethical question. I'm glad I said I'm not a lawyer, but so the legal question I think boils down to this: if I use your writing without attribution in my work, that's called plagiarism. It's an intellectual property violation, right? Like no question about that. But what if there's an AI system that uses your ideas, but that doesn't just write down your ideas, but like it's a mishmash of tokens, letters, syllabi, words, sentences, and at the end of the day, it gives something that sounds very much like you, but it's not exactly what you wrote or what you said. And so obviously companies like OpenAI are claiming that that's not intellectual property violation, and then the New York Times sued them saying that a lot of what OpenAI does is regurgitate what the New York Times has written, and so that's a form of plagiarism, and so they're still fighting it out in court. So that's the legal part. Where does getting inspired by somebody's ideas end, and where does plagiarism start, right? Now, there's also an ethical component there. And one thing is, of course, about people who are alike, like artists who are alike. And for them, their expectation is to be paid for the use of their data in artificial intelligence systems, because ultimately these AI companies are for profit, and so they use other people's ideas, and yet what they produce, even if it may not be reducible to anybody's output, it uses that output. And so I think creatives now are organizing to be recognized as such and to be paid for what artificial intelligence produces. For artists who are not alive, that's an even more complicated ethical question, because sometimes their estate may seek royalties on their behalf. What I think a more complicated question is, do we, as people who are still alive, have a right to copy the ideas or the voice or the likeness of somebody who's not alive to quote unquote bring them to life? And I don't know. I mean, it's a complex question, and I don't have a very clear answer. I mean, I don't do it by myself, but I've heard arguments on both sides.
Thank you. Not really a question, but a remark I have here is that this is not the first time a technology comes along and some jobs are displaced and a machine takes jobs. The difference I see here is that in the past examples, like a car, like electricity, they took years, decades to be mass produced and massively used. AI, came along very fast and got used in a very distributed way, very quickly. Is that probably the main problem? Because for the other situations, people had time, sometimes a generation time, to change their job. But here, they probably find out from today to next week they lose their job.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like one of the biggest predictors of social unrest is really whether technology replaces jobs or enhances them. So whether it actually leaves people unemployed and without an income, or helps them do their job more effectively. And of course, related to that, whether people can find alternative employment. So automobiles are a good example. So obviously automobiles displaced anybody who would ride a horse, tend to a horse, and so on and so forth. And also the horses were gone. But then a lot of those people could be absorbed into the new economy as car factory workers, drivers, and so on and so forth. So the question is AI going to bring in an influx of new jobs, or will it enhance existing jobs, or is it actually going to lead to replacement? So far, we haven't really seen massive displacement. Like the past 2 or 3 years, since the advent of OpenAI in November 2022, there are these expectations that the job market is going to collapse, and it hasn't collapsed, except in certain creative industries, like for example visual arts, where there has been a lot of replacement. But in other industries, I think the trend so far seems to be that jobs are retained. I mean, I don't want to speculate, in 5 years time, 10 years time, maybe a lot of the cognitive jobs will go and maybe they won't. But I think society should prepare for alternative forms of employment for sure, or alternative ways of providing benefits, a social safety net for citizens in case AI ends up being very disruptive.
Thank you. That's a nice segue to my next question, which is about education. You and several people in the audience are from universities, academia, and the role of education, report to AI, is very paramount. The question is, are higher education programs effectively integrating ethical design directly into technical application development? Or are we still treating ethics as an afterthought to the code?
Yeah, difficult question. So, we're trying. So, for example, in engineering education, there are ethics, there's an ethical certification, right? And so, students have to take ethics courses. And so making that a lot more about AI literacy, for example, could be one of the ways in which we could incorporate ethics into more technical education. And vice versa. I think today every student, social sciences, humanities, law, doesn't matter, should be literate about AI, so they should take AI literacy courses. Now, anybody who has ever been to a university knows that there's a lot of bureaucracy that needs to sort of go into all of those things. Like, if I'm being paid by the College of Arts and Sciences, and Shadrock is being paid for by the College of Science and Engineering, like, we can't co-teach a course. It's like, it's going to be a nightmare to just arrange the bureaucracy of things. Sometimes it's really things like that get in the way. So it's not so much the intellectual side of things, it's really the bureaucratic side that ends up being difficult. But at this moment, I think we're really at an inflection in higher education. Most professors think of AI as just a plagiarism machine, which is partly true. But that's not the only thing that we need to worry about. I think we need to rebuild the trust with our students. We want to make sure that we trust them and they trust us in the age of AI. The other thing is future jobs. I mean, students are extremely anxious that they are going to get great grades and they're going to have their diplomas and then they're going to be unemployed. Last year, big tech basically stopped hiring junior developers, and so for the first time we saw a slump in things like computer science, majors that are always very popular with smart, hardworking kids, and so we want to make sure that we prepare them for the future, and there isn't really one easy answer as far as I'm concerned, but I think we should try to make them more AI literate. We should make sure that they're prepared for our future with AI.
Okay, just a quick follow-up question on that. When we teach ethics in AI, are we trying to make people or students more ethical, or just tell them how to document ethical aspects or be careful not to fall in traps?
In my experience, students don't necessarily buy our value systems. Our job is not really indoctrination. Our job is really to show them this is the field, and you make up your mind, but to make an informed decision. So a lot of students might not know things like bias and discrimination in AI systems, or disinformation campaigns, or the environmental impact. And so it's our job to tell them that there are these risks in addition to all of these sort of potential benefits. And ultimately, what we need to develop, I think, is critical thinking skills. So, something that I keep saying is that every major has, of course, a lot of technical information. I teach comparative politics, so you need to know about electoral systems, political decision-making systems, presidential system versus parliamentary system, all those details. But at the end of the day, there's also the essence of comparative politics, because students can learn to memorize things, but the essence is really where the critical thinking skills play a role. Comparative politics is really about how societies make decisions. Or the essence of computer science is not writing a lot of code. The essence of computer science is solving real problems using computers. Everything else is built around that fundamental sort of definition. And so our students really should understand the essence of their vocation. and should make informed decisions about whether they want to use AI, how much they want to use AI. And again, it's not easy. I mean, on campus, I hear people saying we should ban AI. I also hear people saying we should make it an AI campus, and most people are somewhere in between. A lot of people don't care. And so, bringing all those people together to come up with like a good, workable system for all of our students, it's not easy, and nobody knows the perfect answer, but we should try.
Thank you very much. At this point, I want to open to the floor, question from the floor.
Or I think if they use a loud voice for asking the question, that's also viable.
We'll see how it goes. Yes.
If you can say more about the environmental impact of AI. You mentioned the word, but you didn't.
Yes. Yeah, so the environmental impact of AI. It wasn't a big deal before generative AI. I think, like, I mean, decision-making systems, they also ran on large amounts of data, etc. But I think the energy need wasn't as great. Training generative AI models uses a lot of compute power, which translates into electricity and data storage facilities like data centers. And data storage also means a need to cool down the data center, so which requires water usage. This is, I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but definitely, the numbers are something like, well, in about 10 years, if you go at the rate that we grow, the energy needs of AI will be like, I don't know, like the entire country of India, which has 1.4 billion people, right? So like, very, very high demand, and it's not clear whether we actually have the supply, either the energy supply, and so that is one. About the water impact, I think that is maybe one of the most controversial things. Definitely, AI uses like readily available water. So how quickly, that can be restored, it's questionable, especially in communities where water usage is already scarce. And that's a major worry. And I'll be happy to send along some articles and some reports on the subject too, because we're putting together a teaching package for the conference on May 15th, so I'll be happy to share that for more specific data.
Thank you very much. I heard something about this environmental impact, that when we talk about the impact of AI, we're just summing up how much energy goes to those data centers to answer our questions. But we don't count that maybe a job that would take, let's say, 10 hours, now would be taking just half an hour. And then you can turn off your computer for the remaining 9.5 hours that you don't need to turn it on, in case you choose to. I mean, some people just turn it on no matter what. So what I'm trying to get at is that maybe we are even going to be able to save electricity and other resources.
No, you're right. I think the actual energy usages, what is counted as now. In the future, I don't know if the efficiency gains will be so much that, like you say, 20-fold to be able to actually make up for that. I think so far it hasn't been, but if there's a future scenario in which that happens, that could be a possibility. But so far I think there's a bit of a mismatch between the current risk and possible future efficiency gain.
Thank you very much. Okay, next question.
I can go with this question. When it comes to AI, all the time there's like a dilemma or the paradox of a model can be functioning if enough data will be provided to them. So the better data, more data, the model will be more performant. So as we go forward, we see that we want to
I sometimes hear that from my students too, that like they care about privacy, but they're afraid that it's gone. Like there is just no way to bring back a period of privacy. I don't know. I mean, in some ways, this decade, like right now, maybe people are a lot more aware of the privacy risks than they were like 10, 15 years ago. I think there was a crazy time, like between 2005 and 2015, where like awareness around privacy risks were just it wasn't there. Maybe some of the scandals in the US, authoritarian regimes elsewhere in the world sort of woke people up to the reality that whatever data we put out there, somebody may end up using that at the personal level and at a more corporate level, like at a more collective level. Also, like even if it's not like personal targeting, when we share data, it ends up being like targeted advertisements and things like that. So that are not personal, but still like end up customizing our attention, our interests. I think there are some steps to enhance privacy, but again, I mean, individuals alone cannot do much. I think it has to be a collective effort. For example, airports. A lot of the things that are really very convenient are facial recognition based, right? So like Nexus, whatever, Global Traveler. I mean now some airline companies even like take your photo as you go into the plane, so like at the gate. Now all of that would be okay if then the data weren't sold to another company or to government for like repressive purposes, and so and who's to stop that company? I mean, if it's not collectively lawmakers who are supposed to represent us, I don't know who. And I think that's the worry, because once several strands of data are collected, it's quite easy to sort of individualize, the data sources, and again, that could be used for benign purposes, but also there are some sort of more malignant purposes, obviously. And I mean, you're right. I mean, I think that way, we need to rethink our sort of notions of privacy that really emerged, I think, at a different time. They emerged at a time when old school cameras were sort of dominant, or they were a major privacy risk. Right now, we are leaking data all the time, and so it's impossible not to leak data in today's economy. Even if you don't have a computer, even if you don't have a smartphone or whatever, what are you going to do when you go to the doctor's office? They collect data there too, and so it's just impossible not to leak data. So the best we can do is to make sure that the data sources are not bought and sold freely on the market, or again sold to government sometimes in some cases.
Thank you. Next question.
Is there any specific data set for ethics that you can apply different models and kind of compare different models?
Not sure. Like you mean to test the accuracy, or?
Yeah. Like how do you or maybe kind of related question is, what's the most controversial ethical things that you find in these new models, the frontier models, that's very concerning to you?
Yeah. So accuracy is definitely an issue. So these models don't necessarily have a theory of truth or fact or scientific findings or things like that. Typically, they go with what is statistically plausible, and sometimes that aligns. What is statistically plausible ends up being the correct answer too. But it's also very possible that every once in a while they come up with unreliable answers. And if truth really matters, if facts really matter in a line of work, then that's usually one of the issues. I know cybersecurity scholars really worry about, or practitioners really worry about things like what if somebody learns how to make a bomb and things like that. There's also that kind of risk. And then of course, these models also, they often, their view of the world is very much shaped by the data they ingest. And so Grok is different from Gemini, or Grok is really different from all the others. And I'm not quite sure why, but so their view of the world is very much shaped by, I think, the data that they ingest. Was it Washington Post? I think one of the newspapers in the past released some information about where the data come from and things like that. And so that can give a sense of some of the problems as well. Not all, but some.
You mentioned that EU has stricter rules or regulations for AI. So how do you handle this part of the who is in charge of the one decision for AI models, let's say for article discovery? How do you handle that? Is it the CEO who will be the one or is it someone that gathers the data set?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the European Union has the AI Act and the stricter regulations. So how do they decide which human, say, in a chain of command in a company is responsible, right? So they don't necessarily name people. What they say is that companies are liable as collective entities. And then the other thing is, if I remember correctly, all of their penalties are civil penalties. So that is to say there is no criminal penalty, so there is no individual crime associated with the AI Act. But so it goes something like this. Say a company has a high-risk system. Say it has a product that could be used for selling things to children. So manipulative advertising practices are possible. Now, the first thing that the company should do is, of course, try to mitigate that risk. And then they should release annual reports about whether they are in conformity with the law. And so if they're in conformity, then there is no problem. But if the EU finds them in violation, then it fines the company. And typically it's something like 2% of their annual revenue. So, for small companies, that's a lot of money. And so then the company pays the price that way. So there is really no individual who's sort of paying the price. It's the company as a whole. And so my guess is that for most companies, it's going to be the legal compliance team that's going to be in charge of making sure that it's AI compliant. Now, of course, for large companies, that's easy. Like Microsoft has an army of lawyers. They know who is in charge of what. But with small businesses, I think it's a bit more complicated. I mean, think about an AI startup with 8 employees. They probably don't have a lawyer there, right? And so for them, it's a little bit more complicated, and that's why small businesses are often worried about these kinds of big regulations. I know that the European Union has also what is called a sandbox, regulatory sandbox. So the idea is, if a small company wants to play around with this product before deploying it, the European Union gives them some leeway, so it doesn't fine them right away. If they look at they spend some years figuring out whether they are in compliance with the law. I hope that answers your question.
Next question. Maybe I ask one. Going back to the education thing, but instead of university setting, let's say feminism. As a parent, they recommend people don't give mobile phones or TV and don't expose TV, don't expose their children to TV till some age, like 3-year-old or some, say 4. Is there any study on what is the right age to expose kids to AI?
I'm not aware of it. That's a good question, though. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. With cell phones, with social media, I think they say that under an hour every day is okay. In fact, it may be better than having no social media at all because it builds social skills, etc. Anything about 1 hour per day is bad, and then it gets progressively worse. The more people use it. A lot of school districts, of course, now are banning the use of smartphones in the classroom or even in school campuses. With AI, I don't know. It's a good question. And there were some high-profile cases of minors committing suicide or harming themselves. A small number, but still very worrisome when minors are involved. Having a conversation with chatbot and maybe falling in love and then doing harmful things. So I guess small but really sort of worrisome cases. But I don't know, and I think this is also an area of legislation maybe that I ignored when we were first having this conversation, is social media use. Not so much AI necessarily, maybe AI or not, but like social media use and children. Some jurisdictions try to either put age limits or age verification or ban like minors altogether from social media platforms. I mean, historically that has proven to be actually not very helpful. Children find a way is one. And the other thing is age verification has its own downside, which is like when a child basically uploads their form of ID to prove that they are between 13 and 18 or something like that, they create some data privacy risk to themselves as well. So again, it's one of those things where there is no perfect solution. But to your specific question, I really don't know if anybody has done this kind of research. It's a huge debate, by the way. I mean, obviously, one of the biggest teachers federation in the country, like a labor union, AFT, basically signed this like $23 million with OpenAI and Microsoft to have AI in the classroom. And then there are other educators who believe that there should be absolutely no AI in K through 12. And so it is a very political field.
Thank you. Anybody in the audience has an opinion on that? Okay, so any other question?
It's a naive question. So currently we have models AIs for health, for programming, as a chatbot, and for planning and so on. Do we have a model or AI for ethics?
Some people are working on that. It's complicated because some ethical paradigms are easy to quantify, or they're easier to quantify than others. And so, like, can you quantify care or sympathy or compassion or love? And so, like, and to some the answer is yes, and others the answer is absolutely not. I mean, I don't see why existing AI tools cannot help people clarify their minds sometimes. But an AI model making the decision, making the ultimate ethical call, is something that I personally find like objectionable, because I mean, maybe I'm still human, but I feel like humans understand their nuances and their culture and their sort of the specifics of their situation in better than machines, and so they can exercise better judgment, I feel, when faced with an ethical dilemma. I mean, there are some humans who are horrible at all of this, but there are some humans, I think, that, or enough humans, many of us who have that sort of cultural or contextual nuance, and so we are better at ethical decision making. At least maybe it's my bias, but that's how I think.
I wanted to just ask a question related to like this regulation. I was thinking about this a while ago, before that also this. I think we have, the way that I see artificial intelligence role is different than like my perspective. I see that like the extension of the human intelligence. And so the problem
there's a bit of a time limit there. I think at some point we need to come up with whatever rules of robotics that we need to come up with sooner rather than later, because you're right that, I mean, think about a scenario where every single military in the world has incorporated offensive AI capabilities. Like, there is no going back from that, and it's just, you know, it's going to be a nightmare. And so, like, right now is the time. Like, if you wait, I don't know, a couple of years or maybe a generation, actually, yeah, it will not be possible. Or, for example, you know, maybe related to what you're saying, like, let's imagine a stock exchange market where, like, you know, buy and sell decisions are made by AI bots. And by the way, you know, companies, brokers are already using AI to make, you know, important financial decisions. Now, that's fine. But what happens when AI systems are, like, you know, operating for, I don't know, short selling, or like generally market manipulation, right? How do we stop that? And again, unless, you know, we hold the humans who devise and use these systems accountable, there may be a scenario where, like, no human actually is causing the harm, but, like, you know, say bots that were sort of released onto the market are causing sort of market manipulation. And so that's why, yeah, I think like, this might create a situation where escalation of AI use in certain settings might make regulation impossible in the future. I think, yeah, the time is now, really.
Thank you. Any more questions? Maybe I ask one more question. It's about the country of Albania. I heard they have a virtual minister in their cabinet. Have you heard about it, and what do you think about this?
Yeah, it's a gimmick, I think. it's sort of like, there's this robot, Sophia, and they called it, not her, they called it an AI robot, and then, like, it didn't even have basic AI functionality, and then they gave the robot, like, citizenship of Saudi Arabia, and then they asked, like, if it was fighting for women's rights. Of course not. I mean, like, so sometimes when people do these things, and Albania, it has a robot minister, but, like, I don't even know what that means. I mean, like, can that AI system make like, decisions? Can it actually implement those decisions? Would the bureaucrats working under that robot actually, like, take these decisions seriously, or is it really just a way to attract investment? I don't know. I really. Yeah, sorry if I'm sounding skeptical or cynical, but sometimes I feel like that's just a gimmick.
I totally understand your view of this particular implementation, but don't you think that it has a futuristic position in some environments that you can have, even not a country, like in a board of the company, have an AI just sitting there and have it work?
I mean, looking at many of the politicians in the world right now, yes, maybe robots will be better. Anything will be better. Cats will be better. So there's definitely that. But I think AI systems are really good at making decisions, or at least recommending decisions where there's a lot of data. Humans are really struggling with understanding the data, and the machine system is actually much better at analyzing the sort of complexity and the nuances of data. I think in those situations, yeah, definitely companies or even political systems may benefit from AI. I think where AI is less perhaps incapable is where there's genuine human conflict. Say, like, I don't know, I want just, you know, a bridge from here to my home, because that's going to be very convenient for me, and it's going to cost $5 billion, and so other people probably think that that's costly and we should spend that money on education. Yet others will think that, no, well, that actually closes their view, and so that, like, you know, reduces their property value. Is there a correct solution to this problem? No, there isn't one correct solution. It's going to be value conflict, right? And so that's why we have democracies that are, you know, sometimes not the best, but typically they're better than any other system in managing value conflict. And so I'm worried that, like, you know, when AI AI systems sort of make these decisions, it's actually going to lead to sort of a greater level of human disenchantment and dissatisfaction than, I mean, if the robots make the ultimate decision, obviously robots can help with narrowing down the options, they can help with understanding the data, they can help us with, maybe even our own values, but at the end of the day, I think politics is very much about differences of values, differences in interests, and how we navigate living in a society with those differences. And so there, I don't think AI will be the sort of the ultimate decision maker.
Back to the same question but in a different context. There are tools that you can basically answer some questions, and the tool tells you which political party you are more affiliated. If somebody is on the fence, so to speak, doesn't know where to go, which party to vote for, do you think this is a good option to just use this tool and say, okay, I'll cast my vote for this or that party?
There was an article from 2014, I mean this is many years before ChatGPT, many years before Google's attention article, so like it's really, the sort of old school deep learning from 2014, and the title was, Facebook knew I was gay before I knew it. And so basically based on a person's taste profile, Facebook basically came up with some sort of recommendation for products, friends, and so sometimes these systems actually know who we are as well as us, and sometimes better than we do. And yeah, I mean that could be dangerous and that could be helpful, and I think so far it has been used in dangerous ways. So like the 2016 election, the Cambridge Analytica scandal was very much premised on this idea that this company was using low intensity voters or low interest voters, so like people who don't care about politics that much, to tell them not to vote, to sway the election one way or the other. And so like these people were already feeling that politicians are all bad, I don't know if I want to vote, like it's a waste of my time, and then they were being told that, yeah, don't go vote. That's manipulation, that's essentially electoral manipulation, but actually the same underlying technology can be used in more useful ways too, right? Maybe I'm somebody who's really confused about all the different political options, and maybe if I were presented with more information, I could make up my mind. Instead of like researching 2 candidates or 5 candidates or 8 candidates, maybe an AI system can give a better sense of what their different stances are on different issues. So like in that way, AI in and of itself, I think, wouldn't cause harm, even at the political level. It can help people clear their minds. But the thing is, the dominant use so far has not been that.
Thank you. So we have time for the last question.
I want to ask a little bit about if there's a conflict of interest here between, let's say, the owners of the AI, or let's say the billionaires, the investors, the body that owns this AI. I'm talking about tools like the models themselves, but also things like Facebook, where you can say it's an AI algorithm that manipulates. If there's a conflict of interest between that and kind of the essence of democracy, because if, let's say, there's a candidate that's going to vote for this regulation or no regulation in AI, then you could kind of manipulate your users, to your previous point, like the 2016 scandal, and similarly just through algorithms, through cause biases for people. If there's a conflict of interest there, and if one could argue that the future of democracy could be in danger.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and there are multiple ways. In the United States, the technology industry typically portrayed itself as apolitical, like not getting involved in politics too much, or if they were involved, it was mostly for lobbying, so like they would go to Washington DC to defend their interests. But because a lot of tech companies are in cities like San Francisco, Silicon Valley, broadly speaking, Bay Area, Seattle, Boston, New York, etc., there's this understanding that like, a lot of tech developers are progressive by American standards, but beyond that, they were trying not to be overtly political. I think that has changed a little bit. Like they realize that, especially Donald Trump, sort of likes personal relationships with technology leaders, and many of them actually went to his inauguration, and they're trying to cultivate these like more personal relationships. with them. I mean, obviously, Elon Musk is a bit of a special case, but others, I don't think they're necessarily always supportive of any one political party, but they are really playing the political game. And yes, I mean, that creates risks in terms of the market power of these companies, because one could say that they're just private companies, like if you don't like them, don't buy their product. But it's not like that, right? I mean, products like X or Facebook, they're in some ways public utilities. These are the places where people sort of sit down and talk to other people. And so I think there's a bit of a conflict between the use of these products as public utilities and the fact that they're privately owned and sometimes they may reflect certain political proclivities. And then in the case of China, in things that are not political, AI companies do quite well, but of course, there is the underlying idea that you cannot criticize the Chinese government. Like that's not allowed. And so, and again, that adds additional risks to people who want to use these products, who want to incorporate them into their everyday lives. And so, for democracy, I mean, it's definitely an uphill battle. Even before AI, like the past decade has been quite bad for democracy around the world. Just about any continent you can imagine, there have been major threats to democratic functioning. And so, yeah, I mean, it's definitely what's coming up is going to be more difficult than before when it comes to the defense of democracy as a form of government.
Thank you very much. So before we end the session, is there anything else that's in your mind that you want to share?
Yeah, one thing that I find really fascinating is how people are polarized about AI. Either finding it super useful or totally useless, or finding it to be a force for good in the world or a force for evil. And I think that goes to show the complexity of the technology itself. I mean, all of these can be true at the same time to different people, and I think that somehow makes me hopeful too that the future is wide open. I don't think that our future with AI is completely predestined or written. We can really build a better future. One thing that really makes me hopeful is that the whole AI ethics, AI governance community has been very much alive for the past decade or so. So it's not like cigarettes where it took people a generation to realize that some things about cigarettes were actually really bad. With AI, I think the realization has come fairly early on. But of course, this political movement is very complicated around the world. One doesn't feel that we are moving into a safer and more democratic world. So I think the sort of fight for good AI is really very much tied up with these other political struggles. So let's just hope for the best.
Thank you very much. Please join me in applauding our speaker.
Oh, thank you. All right, thank you so much. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
So we have a call till 8 o'clock. You can enjoy, talking to each other, talking to the speaker, having some snack over there. And also let me thank Nilüfer and Alifa for providing the venue for us and all the magnetic help that SUTA provided to them. Thank you.